This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. A top Russian diplomat is visiting Beijing for talks a day after an armed military rebellion challenged President Vladimir Putin's forces, AP correspondent Mimi Montgomery reports.
Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Andrei Rudenko is in Beijing for a meeting with Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang. According to the Chinese Foreign Ministry, they'll be discussing international and regional issues of common concern. While no formal allies, Russia and China are maintaining close ties, with China not condemning the invasion in Ukraine. Rudenko's visit comes a day after the head of a private mercenary army rebelled against President Putin's power. I'm Mimi Montgomery.
Greece's conservative New Democracy Party leader Kyriakos Mitsotakis vowed to speed up reforms following his landslide victory in the country's second election in 5 weeks. Supporters celebrated outside party headquarters in Athens, cheering, clapping, setting off fireworks, and waving blue and white party flags. Near complete results Sunday show him gaining a comfortable parliamentary majority to form a government for a second 4-year term. Guatemalans are electing a new president and vice president, as well as filling all congressional seats and hundreds of local posts after one of the most tumultuous electoral seasons in the Central American nation's recent history. A little more than 9 million people are registered to vote, but many have expressed disappointment with their presidential choices after 3 opposition candidates were excluded by authorities, with none of the 22 presidential candidates polling near the required 50% threshold for winning outright. A second round of voting on August 20th is likely. This is VOA News. Activists and first responders in Syria say an airstrike over a busy vegetable market in the northwest has killed at least 9 people. According to activists and Britain-based opposition war monitor, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, it was Russia, a top ally of Syrian President Bashar Assad, that launched the strike early Sunday near the Turkish border. Opposition held northwestern Syria's civil defense organization known as the White Helmets said over 30 people have been wounded. Israeli lawmakers on Sunday began debating a bill that would limit the Supreme Court's powers, rebooting a fiercely opposed judicial overhaul instigated by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's religious nationalist coalition. VOA's Diane Roberts has more.
Anti-government demonstrations had prompted Netanyahu to suspend his judicial drive in March to allow compromise talks with opposition parties. He declared those talks fruitless last week and ordered some of the legislation to be revived. Coalition lawmakers have indicated that the new bill would be a far softer version of previous proposals that had sought to almost totally roll back the Supreme Court's power to rule against the executive. Diane Roberts, VOA News.
In the U.S., members of the Democratic Party are speaking out about moves by lawmakers in several Republican-led states to exert more authority over state and local election offices. AP correspondent Jackie Quinn reports.
Some election observers say they're concerned about lawmakers potentially trying to grab more power through new legislation. They point to a new law in Texas which eliminates the top election official in the Democratic-leaning Harris County, which also allows the state's Republican Secretary of State to take over the county election office. Republican lawmakers, fueled by Donald Trump's false claims of widespread election fraud, said the moves are needed for oversight. But voting experts say it's imperative that elections remain free of political manipulation. I'm Jackie Quinn.
Vote counting was underway in Sierra Leone on Sunday, the Electoral Commission said, as the opposition claimed a lack of transparency following fiercely fought general elections a day earlier. Tallying, which consists of adding up counted ballots from each polling unit at the regional level, was taking place in the capital, Freetown, as well as in other places, the commission said. On Saturday, Sierra Leoneans voted in presidential, parliamentary, and local elections, with many polling stations opening late in the capital. I'm Joe Ramsey. This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. The boss of Russia's Wagner mercenary group reemerged on Monday, 2 days after leading an aborted mutiny, saying he had never intended to overthrow the government and giving few clues about his own fate or the deal under which he stood down. Last seen on Saturday night, smiling and high-fiving bystanders from the back of an SUV as he withdrew from a city occupied by his men. Yevgeny Prigozhin said his fighters had halted their campaign to avert bloodshed. Russia's Wagner troops' weekend mutiny of Moscow lasted fewer than 24 hours, but left big questions about the direction of operations in Ukraine and President Vladimir Putin and Wagner head Yevgeny Prigozhin's political futures. Jonathan Spear reports from the VOA Moscow Bureau.
Russian officials have flooded the media with assurances that Putin emerged stronger from this short crisis. But international observers say on the contrary, the Russian leader's weaknesses have been irreversibly exposed. Now the Russian authorities are working to cover up the tracks of the Wagner Group, which until last week was praised by Kremlin propaganda. Prigozhin has challenged Moscow's narrative. Speaking of the precarious situation of the Russian army in Ukraine, one of the reasons why, Prigozhin says, he launched the mutiny. For the VOA Moscow Bureau, Jonathan Spear, VOA News.
U.S. President Joe Biden on Monday said the United States and its allies were not involved in the brief uprising by Russian mercenaries against the Kremlin.
We made clear that we were not involved. We had nothing to do with it. This was part of a struggle within the Russian system.
Biden said he had directed his national security team to update him on an hour-by-hour basis. This is VOA News. Mercenaries from Russian private military contractor Wagner Group have returned to their bases after marching towards Moscow, but though the weekend's armed mutiny is over, the impact on Africa could be yet to unfold. Reuters correspondent Edward Barn has more.
At the weekend, spokespeople for the governments in Bamako and Bangui declined to comment on how the turmoil might affect their security strategies. But the sudden rift has created a diplomatic quandary. Both countries have been seeking closer ties with Russia. They have in the past said that their military cooperation agreements are with Russia and not Wagner. Last year, Moscow also committed to send Mali shipments of fuel, fertilizer and food worth about $100 million.
Reuters correspondent Edward Barron. Prince William is launching a 5-year project to end homelessness in Britain. AP correspondent Charles de Ledesma has our story.
The heir to the throne says he wants to make sure that instances of people being left without a roof over their heads are rare, brief and unrepeated. William will announce details of his programme over the next 2 days as he visits 6 pilot projects around the country that have received grants, each of up to $637,000 from the Royal Foundation, the charity that supports the work of William and his wife. The Prince says tackling homelessness has been an important issue for him since he visited a shelter with his mother, Princess Diana, as a schoolboy. Charles de Ledesma, London.
Pakistan and several African nations called for more protections for migrants at the UN Human Rights Council on Monday following the shipwreck off the Greece coast. At least 82 people died and hundreds more are feared dead in the June 12th to 13th shipwreck along the world's most deadly migration route from Libya to Italy. The suspect in the U.S. mass shooting that killed 5 people at a Colorado LGBTQ+ nightclub last year has pleaded guilty in the attack. AP correspondent Julie Walker reports.
Anderson Lee Aldrich faces life in prison after pleading guilty to 5 counts of murder, 46 counts of attempted murder, and no contest to 2 counts of bias-motivated crimes. Aldrich, who is non-binary, told the judge, "I intentionally and after deliberation caused the death of each victim." In a series of jailhouse phone calls to the Associated Press prior to the guilty plea, Aldrich expressed remorse.
I had to take responsibility for what happened.
The attack at Club Q came over a year after Aldrich had been arrested for threatening their grandparents and vowing to become the next mass killer. Charges were ultimately dropped. I'm Julie Walker.
Find more on our website 24 hours a day at voanews.com. I'm Joe Ramsey.